I'm with Laurie Kaye, everyone. Welcome to Walk-ins Welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
This is very exciting. I love when people refer people to this podcast and they're like, this woman has this book and she's really cool and you might have a great conversation with her. And it's always exciting for me to be able to meet new people who have I might not be exposed to any other way. And it sounds like you have quite the life story that you've told partially in your book, Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper, which is a great name, by the way. Great title for a book.
Well, actually, the title of the book is Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper: My Life Leading Up to John Lennon's Last Interview. That's a very important part to keep in the title.
Yes, that's true. Um, Tell me how were you inspired to write this book? What inspired you to put this down?
Well, of course, I was leading up to what I was sure was going to be the best day of my life, my interview with John Lennon and Yoko Ono at the Dakota on December 8th, 1980. And tragically, when he was shot and killed mere hours after our interview ended, it became the worst day of my life. So I
Mm,
still call it the best and worst day, and, it took me years to write my book, and something I realized while considering writing my memoir was that unless you've kept a daily diary and written down what goes on in your life every day of the year, which unfortunately I never did, lifetime memories can be really hard to come back to, especially as you get older, like I am. And plus, if you're not a celebrity, which I'm not, getting a literary agent and a publisher eventually interested in your memoir can also be extremely difficult unless you're willing to self publish, which I never was, never wanted to do. So, lucky me, I was able to make it work and find a traditional publisher, independent company that was super eager to read my self edited first draft. And they sent me a contract right away to publish my book. Yay. So it came out um, recently. And still, there are a number of reasons that it took me over 40 years to basically start writing my book, almost 4 decades, actually. It was since the afternoon I spent with John and Yoko. Um, because not only was I feeling much too miserable and, yes, extremely guilty to sit down and put together my story on paper, but I was also concerned about embarrassing my mother, since I knew I needed to truthfully describe her decayed single mom treatment of me throughout
mm.
my childhood and also during my teen years. And I was also far too busy contemplating and slowly but surely coordinating my upcoming career changes, since I felt the need to leave radio and make the move from on air to print and eventually over to TV and video writing and production. And my freelance and far beyond full time gigs kept me wrapped up multiple hours of each and every day and night of the week. So sadly, I had no time or energy to even think about concentrating on or coming up with my book. And this was despite the fact that, as I say in my introductory first chapter, which I eventually started writing in 2020 following both my mother's passing away and the start of the pandemic, um, pretty much my TV production work had come to a complete close with COVID. So whenever anyone found out over the years that our RKO team and I had conducted John Lennon's final interview, jaws dropped, people gasped, and the inevitable question was asked, Laurie, when are you going to write your book? Finally, I was able to answer, now. So that was probably the only decent thing that came from COVID, is that
Yeah.
gave me the time to do it.
Okay. And did you have the book deal before you wrote it, or did you write it and then get the book deal?
Well, I wanted to start writing it to see if I even had it in me still,
Right.
which it turned out I did. And when I submitted it to the publisher, it was about maybe half done or something.
Right.
They were very excited about it. And believe it or not, the coolest comment that ever convinced me to write my memoir actually came from John Lennon himself after he begged me to let him autograph, along with Yoko Ono, the copy of her great book, Grapefruit, which I brought to the Dakota with me. Here's the copy of it.
Uh-huh.
So you see. Um, I said, "Of course you can sign it," and I thanked him profusely. Thanked them both. They both signed it, as you can see. There's the autograph and everything, which appears in my book as well. I put it in there so people could act like it was their autograph too. Um, anyway, John was thrilled to be able to sign it for me since he'd written Grapefruit's introduction. And when I told him how grateful I was, he made a point of telling me how much he himself loved it when authors signed their books for him. So I, of course, told him that when I wrote mine eventually, I'd definitely send him an autographed copy. And he smiled at me like crazy and said, "Great, Laurie," which made me feel even more than great, and definitely was what led me to write my book, even though
Yeah,
I
because
obviously couldn't
at
send.
that point in his life and career, he was pretty skeptical of press. You know, he was pretty like there had been some confrontational interviews that he had had where I think you mentioned in your book too, the one where he was, I believe it was Playboy, where he was a bit, adversarial with the journalist who was doing the interviewing. And there were
Correct.
just certain things that he wasn't willing to talk about. And you write about how nervous you were for this interview just because you had done your research and seen that he was, who's no longer with the Beatles. There was he was with Yoko, all of this stuff around her. And how did you how did you get over your fear, and how did it sounds like it went very well. I mean, he
It
sounds like he was very jovial and loving and kind of peaceful with you.
exceptionally a great interview, probably the best I've ever done, and I've done many, many, many of them. But we were told from the very beginning, way before the interview itself, don't bring up the Beatles, don't bring up John's past. This interview is about double fantasy and about going forward with Yoko. So I was very secure about that and understood. And on the flight over to New York, I was reading the Playboy interview that had just come out. And of course, the writer of that asked him all about those things. And John was pretty upset about it. It was obvious and kind of it came out in his
Right.
interview. He was not happy at all. And so I was sure that I wouldn't do it. And the cool thing was during the interview, John brought it up himself because he wanted to talk about certain parts of that stuff with us, like how he met Paul and how he met Yoko and some of the Beatles stuff. But basically, it was about him. It was about his family. It was about being a house husband and all of that, and of course what went into double fantasy, which was his love of rock and roll. And it was amazing to talk to him. And not only that, it was amazing the way he treated me, because from the minute he walked in, we'd been in there with Yoko because he was still up at
Mhm.
his photo shoot. And he walked in, and as a joke, when he opened the door and I saw his glasses and his nose, and he started to say something, I turned to him and I said, "Can't you tell we're in the middle of an interview?" And he laughed. He thought that was funny. And he came and he sat next to me on the love seat right in front of their incredible coffee table. And I was so thrilled. I got to spend hours sitting next to John Lennon, like inches away, with him looking at me the whole time. And when he was excited about my questions or supportive of them, he would push down his glasses and look at me right through them and be complimentary, say wonderful things to me, like, "Yes, that's it, love," that kind of thing. And so it was amazing. I had an amazing time. And I believe he did too. He said he enjoyed the interview a lot.
Have you been in touch with Sean? Has he read your book, or does he have you ever been in contact with him?
Well, he was 5 years old when we did the interview, and
Mhm.
he wasn't there that day because, he was off with his nanny
Mhm.
basically all
Mhm.
day, and, the thing is even though I had a feeling he probably wouldn't be there, I brought him a gift, which was a wind-up metal, fire-breathing dragon that I got in Chinatown in San Francisco, and I thought he'd really love. So I brought it for him, and when I was, in the room with Yoko before John came, I showed it to her and she said, "Oh my God, that's incredible. He's going to love it." She said, "But John's going to incredibly love it too." And sure enough, when John came in and saw it and started playing with it, and it walked up and down the coffee table, he was saying, "I don't know if we want to give it to Sean. Maybe we want to keep it for ourselves." And I started laughing. And of course, since he was killed afterwards, I never found out if Sean ever got it, and I thought to myself,
Mm.
Yoko probably didn't give it to him because it reminded her of the worst day of her life, and maybe she didn't
Mhm.
want him to get it. So I never knew. And then this past February, I went to a screening of Sean Lennon's short animated film that was about to win an Academy Award. War is
Mhm.
Over. And I got to talk to him, and I introduced myself as the person who co-conducted John's last interview. And he was, "Oh, my dad," he was really excited to find out. And I said, "And I'm just curious, by any chance, did your mother, after your father died, happen to give you the toy that I brought for you that your father loved and said you would love?" And he said, "What toy was that?" And I told him it was the metal fire breathing dragon. He went, "Oh my God, that was my favorite toy."
No.
So I was thrilled to find out after all that what it meant to him. And of course, I signed a copy of my book that I had brought for him and gave it to him, and hope that he's read it and passed it along to his mother like he said he would. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to meet up with him or talk to him since, but here's hoping. Fingers crossed.
And you've never talked to Yoko since either. That's I think you mentioned that in your book. But,
I
I mean,
did.
maybe you've talked to her since the book came out.
No, I haven't because I have a feeling that I just remind her of
Yeah.
a very tragic day. So I understand
Yeah.
that.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that would make complete sense. I mean, I think even writing something like this would be so hard. Were a lot of people coming to you in the immediate aftermath where there was so much frenzy around it? Was how it must have been hard to write.
It was very hard for me to write because, as I mentioned before, I still consider it the best and the worst day of my life.
Mhm.
And so writing it a lot of the time meant that I cried
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
I still feel guilty about a lot of it.
Why do
And
you feel guilty?
well, a couple of reasons, actually more than that. But the first reason is that because in order to pick the date that John and Yoko were going to do the interview with us, Yoko had her astrologer call us to find out our birthdays, time of
Yeah.
birth, and things about us. And of course, I told them that, and the other guys did as well. And still, with that information, he came up with December 8th,
Mhm.
which John and Yoko were supposed to be on the West Coast and then in Hawaii, but they canceled their plans to do that to meet up with us in New York, which made me feel terrible afterwards, guilty for being born the day I was and for answering questions the way I did. So that was the first part of my guilt, and the second part of my guilt was after the interview when I came out and was immediately accosted by one of the guys waiting outside the Dakota, saying to me over and over, "Did you talk to him? Did you get his autograph? Did you talk to him? Did you get his autograph?" And bugging us. And then when the other guys on my RKO team left and took John and Yoko to the recording studio. And after we hugged and said goodbye, and we had made our plans to get together in San Francisco in a couple weeks and have dinner together, and I was so excited. So the minute they drove off in our limo, I started walking, because I was spending the night in New York and I was going to be having dinner with a friend of mine. And I started walking, and this guy, this creepy guy, started following me, saying as I walked away, "Did you talk to him? Did you get his autograph? Did you talk to him? Did you get his autograph?" Still over and over again. And when I told him to leave me alone and stop following me, he just kept following me faster. And I just wanted to smack him. But of course, I didn't. I just told him to get lost and leave me alone. And I started swearing at him. And finally, he stopped following me. And then afterwards, when I found out that John had been shot, I just had a feeling that it was that guy, even though I felt guilty right off the bat because I never realized that he was carrying a gun in the pocket of the coat he was wearing. And,
Mm,
and also, I should have reported him to the Dakota security system team that was there and
mhm,
told them that he was bugging me, and maybe they would have called the police and maybe they would have come gotten him. But I didn't. And so that's my guilt right there.
mm. There's so many crazy people in New York, and that especially in 1980, it was a different time in New York. But yeah, I can totally understand that. Yeah. I mean, we can shut on ourselves all day. I should have done this. I should have done that. And how did you kind of have you processed it or gotten through it? Did you or do you still carry it? Is it something you've had to work through in therapy or
Yes, I've dealt with it in therapy, but
mm,
unfortunately, no, I still do feel the guilt. I try and get
mm,
rid of it, but it still sits on my head, pounds
mm,
of guilt. And what I do mainly is I have never, ever said his name or talked about him, mentioning it or writing it in my book because I don't want to give him the publicity that he.
mhm.
So that's the one thing I have done.
Yeah. I don't think John would want you to take carry it either. I just get that sense that he wouldn't want you to carry that with you.
No doubt.
Knowing what little I know about him, I don't think he would want you to carry that burden through life. That's just how I feel. I think he's very peaceful in that way.
No doubt.
So, how did you end up in this moment? What led you to this moment? You were on this trajectory. I mean, you mentioned briefly your mom, and I know there's some stepdad stuff in there, which I can very much relate to. And
Sorry to hear.
it's okay. I think it's a very common problem. If you know anything about the Cinderella effect, it's very, very common in broken families. So how did you get into interviewing? How did you end up in this moment? What like how did you do it? How did you get into interviews and rock and roll and
Well, believe it
I
or not,
love actually how crazy your story is too, just in that you like won these random tickets from a radio. I like just the fact that you even won any of those things is crazy because not many people win those things. So tell us how did this begin? Because your story is truly kind of nuts.
well, music played a part of my life since I was a toddler. I
Mm.
got a transistor radio because it kept me basically from having to listen to and get upset with my mother. So, as a very little kid, I would keep it in my ears, the plugs all night, listening to AM radio. And it was incredible, starting out with Elvis Presley and Little Richard and the Beach Boys and then the Beatles. It was so exciting. And I kept listening to music all through the years, going to school. And then when I was in high school and I was listening to KMET, the big FM station in LA. I was calling all the time to win albums and things like that. And when I won the Rolling Stones album that I was really excited about, I was then entered automatically in the contest to win tickets for their Nicaragua benefit concert at the Forum in LA. And I was thrilled and uh, cut school that day with a friend of mine and sat in his car and listened to them on the radio. And my name was the second name out of the four winners of the LA tickets that was called. And it was so excited. So we drove immediately over to the radio station because the concert was going to be that night. And I ran in to pick up tickets. And the receptionist said, "Oh, well, the disc jockey, B. Mitchell Reed, wants to interview you on the air." And I said,
Wow.
"Wow." So I got pulled into his DJ booth and he was asking me questions like my name and my age. And I told him, and he said to me, "Wow. And with a voice like yours, you should be on the radio." And I was so excited because in my head, I thought, that's it. That's going to be my career.
Wow.
I had already knew that I was going to be a writer because my high school AP teacher had told me that I was a great writer. So that would be my career. So I thought, well, I'll put the two together. And I did. I eventually started out as an intern at KFRC AM, the basically the top radio station in the country at the time, the AM station, RKO station. And I loved that internship, and it led to a job as news editor almost right away within just a couple of months. And the minute I got that job, I was also asked, because they loved my writing, to start writing a Beatles special. That was really thrilling for me because it was going to be the longest special about the Beatles ever created in the United States. And it was originally 14 hours long. And even though I came up with a great name, they wanted to call it RKO Presents the Beatles. So when we were able to elongate it within a year or so after it aired to 17 hours, they let me change the name to the one I'd come up with, which is The Beatles from Liverpool to Legend. And it
Mm.
was very exciting for me. So that basically started me off as an interviewer all the way through the rest of my life.
Wow.
Everything from radio to print to video to TV. Done a lot of incredible interviews, and the bulk of them rock and roll and pop. So it's been amazing.
What a wild so you grew up in Los Angeles, correct?
I did.
What a wild time to grow up in LA. What was it like? What was your teen years like, and what was it like in LA then?
Well, a lot of it was spent staying as far away from my mother and stepfather as I possibly could, and the apartments that we moved in every year. We changed apartments, unfortunately. So I basically had to run away from home eventually. But before I did that, I spent a lot of time at friends' houses and at the library and going to live concerts and wherever I could sneak away to. And also, I babysat a lot from a very young age on, like about 10 or 11, so I could make some money and get myself eventually a stereo system so I could listen to more music and not have to listen to my mother and get smacked by her because she was violent as well.
Mm.
And
Was she an alcoholic?
no, she was
Just
just,
borderline or something?
yeah, just
Just
a violent
crazy?
person. Yeah.
Mm.
And I found out years later that she'd actually been in a mental institution in Detroit when she was fairly young, which I
Is
didn't
that where
know.
she was from?
Yes.
And is where was your father?
I honestly never really knew because I never met him, my real father. He left my mother the minute he found out that she was pregnant. They'd only been married a very short time and they'd just moved to LA. And he left and went, I believe, back to either Detroit and then somewhere in the Midwest. So I never ever met him. And then several years later, my mother stopped living with my grandparents who I was pretty much raised by, and got remarried to the kind of creepy guy who turned out to be my stepfather, and I never really had a good relationship with him. But
Mhm.
I have to say that I eventually did have a better relationship with my mother until she came close to passing away, and then it got bad again. She got mentally very ill again, unfortunately.
Mhm.
So it was sad.
I'm sorry. Your stepdad, is he still around?
No, he died before my mother did.
Oh, okay. And were they still together when he died?
Uh, they were still married, but they weren't living together.
Okay.
He was in an
And you
institution.
he was what? Sorry about
In
that?
an institution.
Oh, okay. So he was crazy too.
Um, well, yeah, and also he was physically unhealthy, and he was a very big, tall, heavy guy, so my
Mm,
mother couldn't, take the time to, get him around their apartment or
right.
whatever, so I understood.
And you mentioned you said he was creepy. Is that just like a feeling, or was he just was there stuff? You don't have to
From
go
the
into it
minute
if you don't want to.
From the minute he met me, he put me down, and even though I was already an advanced placement student and straight A's and all that, and talking about going to college, he would say, "Why, you're too good to be a secretary like my mother? Who do you think you are?" And he was
Mhm.
very just putting me down all the time and never, ever supportive of anything I did, ever.
Mm. That's very hard to overcome.
Yes,
It's very hard to it's always impressive to me when people can overcome that, especially from their primary care providers, because it's so deeply internalized when you're hearing it from people who are supposed to care for you and believe in you and love you. And then I've found that it's like an undertow that kind of kicks in randomly. It's something I always have to, like, swim again I can't even swim against it. It's, like, truly like an undertow where it's like, "Swim along, swim along the shore, don't try and fight it or you'll drown." Um,
true.
how did you kind of manage other than running away? I mean, I have this joke that I've done where I'm like, "I should have run away." My biggest regret as a teen is not running away. How did you manage to kind of keep moving forward in your career and in your passion? Did you go to college?
I did. Um,
Okay.
But what I did first of all was I made sure to spend as little time at home, at their apartments that, we had, especially when they were there. So
Mm,
I would either go stay with my grandparents or stay with my aunt or stay with friends. I spent plenty of time, nights and everything with friends, and then, in the evening when I felt that they were being crappy to me, I would go to the library or I would make sure to be babysitting and then I kept getting jobs. So I worked pretty much full time even when I was in high school,
yeah.
whether it was at McDonald's or at a pharmacy or wherever I could get a job or a toy store, and so as much time as I could possibly spend away, the better it made me feel, and the less they could attack me, basically.
Mm. I'm excited to announce a new partnership we have with a company I love, Caliber, a strength training and nutrition coaching program that's completely personalized to you. Through their app, you get paired with a personal trainer, an actual person and not an AI bot, on a fitness program and nutrition plan completely customized to your goals, whether it's muscle building, weight loss, ditching the dad bod, or the mom bod in my case. It's much less than it costs to work with a personal trainer at the gym. It's actually been life changing for me. I literally need somebody who's like, here's what you're doing this week, here's the targets I want you to hit for eating. The app is incredible. It has videos that show you how to do all the workouts, and you can actually reach out to your coach if you have any questions and send them videos of you doing the workout so they can give you form feedback. I need that accountability. This has been really a game changer. And the fact that it's online makes it so easy for somebody who's busy like me. We've arranged a special deal for our Walk Ins Welcome audience where you get $100 off the first 3 months. It's a really good rate, you guys, for what you're getting. And you get a 30-day money back guarantee if you're not happy with the program. Go to caliberstrong.com/walk-ins or click the link below. Are you dealing with an HMO like I am? It's such a pain in the ass. If I want to get any sort of testing done to ensure I'm making my health a priority, I have to wait weeks for an appointment to see my doctor, then get a referral from him or her, and wait weeks more for an appointment with the specialist I needed to see. Quest simplifies this process. I can purchase my own lab tests online and test for a multitude of health issues I might be concerned about, then take those test results to my doctor, better armed with the information I need. At questhealth.com, you can get hundreds of tests across several different categories, from allergies to heart health, hormones, sexual health. It's summer, guys. Women's health tests for egg quantity, perimenopause, menopause, men's health tests for testosterone, prostate, and so much more. These are lab quality tests, the same ones you'd be given at your doctor's office. Use the affiliate link below for a 25% discount and order your test, then visit a nearby Quest Diagnostics location for sample collection. Get fast, shareable test results online and the option to discuss them at no extra cost with an independent physician who may be able to prescribe treatment. Again, use the affiliate link below for a 25% discount and prioritize your health today with lab work on your terms. It's not on your insurance, folks. It's not on your insurance. Where did you go to college?
Well, I went to college. I went to UCLA while I was still in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So that helped me out get an incredible exception to UC Santa Cruz, which was a very hard to get into hippie school at the
Yeah.
time after I graduated high school. So I got into that and spent a while there, which I talk about in my book, and the reason that I ended up leaving there. And then I moved to Bali to study Balinese dance because that was really exciting and helpful for an ankle injury that I'd had and foot injury. And then when I came back, I went to UC Berkeley because I wanted to be in journalism school there. But unfortunately, they had stopped letting people into
Mm.
undergraduate journalism. They stopped that. So I just instead started taking some writing classes. And the first thing that happened was my number one teacher, professor there said, after he read an article that I wrote for him, a news article, and graded it, said, "Why are you taking this class? You already know how to write. You are a news writer. You don't need to be in school. What are you doing?" He said, "Go get an interview and go for an interview for an internship. And once you do, you'll get a job right away." And he was right, because even though I tried at first to get a newspaper interview, I, of course, saw that the radio station KFRC was looking for their very first newsroom intern there. And I got it the minute I interviewed. And that started my career and made me who I am today.
Wow. Did you ever see Zeppelin?
Of course, yeah.
Ah, so jealous. That's like the one bit, when they're like, if you could see any band, it's a toss up between the Doors and Led Zeppelin, but I think it would be Led Zeppelin.
Led Zeppelin once. I did not get to see the Doors, unfortunately, but I saw so many cool bands that I just loved, when I was in high school, and one of them being Rod Stewart and Faces. I mean, that was amazing, and Elton John and Mick and Rolling Stones, of course, like I talked about, and just everybody else that I possibly could. You know,
Mhm.
it was just great. And
We have such a
it was
similar so the more I hear you talk, the more I realize, like, how weirdly similar our path has been. I spent all of my money that I made in, working in restaurants, and I was busing and working very young and in high school as well. Uh, all of it on concerts and music and CDs. I just got it back from my sister, actually. My like those big books of CDs that you would keep in your car. The kids these days have no idea.
Yeah. Well, see, you're so much younger than me. You had CDs. I spent my money on albums, and I still have the bulk of them. The
Oh, that's
sad
awesome.
thing is, well, the sad thing is that thanks to earthquakes and having moved around the country a lot, um, albums that I had were destroyed or lost.
They're so
And
heavy.
yeah, and unfortunately, my first ex-husband um, took a lot of them as well. But
Mm.
I still have well
How
over
many ex-husbands do you have?
just one, but
Oh.
I still have over 750 albums, and many of them are original from high school and college days and my first days at the radio station. So very exciting.
That should be your background, all your albums. 750 is still a lot.
It is. Well, actually, they used to be in here in my office, but now it's just my books that are in here. My albums are in my living room, which is where my record player is. So I keep them
Uh,
there so I can play them whenever I want.
I've been buying albums and I just inherited a bunch and I collect them. And I had a bunch that, like you, I've moved all over America many times because creatives. And and I was just saying to my husband, because I play most of my music now through one of the, Spotify or whatnot, and then through the like speaker on that we have, like a little Bose speaker, but it's still attaches me to my phone, and I wanna be able to put my phone in another room. I also want my daughter to experience just having to listen to an album, because even at her she's 2, and I mean, I don't know if you have children or not, but
No, I don't.
uh, it's wild how intuitive technology is to them, but they also just absorb so much from their parents, clearly. So she'll be back there barking orders at me. I don't use Siri or any of that stuff, but she'll be back there like barking orders at me when we're driving, like, put on Frozen soundtrack. And then I'm like, I don't have Siri. And she's like, Siri, put on Frozen soundtrack. I'm like, no, you have to listen to this album that we're listening to.
Yeah.
I feel like an old person, where it's like, we're gonna listen to the whole album, and you're not just gonna tell me how to change it. I'm not Siri. It's very funny.
Well, one of
Um,
the albums that I love listening to this day is John Lennon's Imagine. It's
mm,
still one of my absolute favorites. So, there's all kinds of albums like that. Uh,
yeah.
not just Beatles or former Fab Four member albums, but so many vintage ones are so cool.
Oh, that's so great. It's funny, my gay uncle got us really into Yoko when we were like teenagers. And
Wow,
I knew one of her albums by complete heart, and I was obsessed with like how avant-garde she was, and kind of just different, and people would die laughing when they would hear me singing along to a Yoko album. They were like, "Who even listens to this?" I'm like, "My gay uncle does. He loves her." And
cool.
yeah, it's so cool that you got to spend time with her alone before he even came in, and that you had her book. And I think in that context, it must have been nice for her and him for you to be equally as interested in her as you were in him.
Absolutely, and I was so thrilled to see their relationship, how it had come back together so beautifully and how much they thought about each other, how and loved each other, and it was really cool because in talking about double fantasy with them, um, they both realized and told me that all men and women have to have more dialogues to keep their relationship going, and that's what the songs in double fantasy were came from and were about, so it was pretty exciting.
What was it that they attributed to the kind of end of their relationship
Well,
before they got back together?
oh, well, unfortunately, everybody thinks that John just walked out on Yoko, but that's not what he said at all. He said that Yoko told him to leave, and he admitted that she introduced him to the assistant, May Pang, and had them basically go off to LA to live and love. And that's what John referred to as the worst time in his life. They call it the lost weekend, but he said it was just terrible. It was about 18 months, and he tried to come back to Yoko before that, but she wasn't into it right off the bat. But then they finally did get back together, and then she got pregnant with Sean too, and so that was very exciting, and he was really happy to be a house husband and raising his son with her.
So he went off with his assistant? Is that what I'm is am
Yes.
I okay, got it. I don't think I really knew that or until yeah, I don't think I fully understood that like last weekend, until I was reading about it.
Yeah, it's all in my book.
Yeah, no, I just
So,
yeah, I don't think that I think that was the first time I had even kind of heard about it. It was something that I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that that's what that meant." Well, I always heard about that, but I didn't really understand what that meant. Um, and so they were able to come back because they just had over dialogue. They just were over communicative, I guess, is what they were saying the solution is.
I don't understand your question, sorry.
They were saying you were saying that their theory with couples is that you have to kind of overly communicate?
Well, that you have to definitely make a point of having a dialogue, to improve your relationship, and, it's important because they figured that, a lot of men and women in relationships weren't really consulting with each other,
Right.
and so they definitely wanted to encourage that.
It feels that way to me very much about in America right now, maybe in the world, but since I'm American, I can really only speak to this country. The disconnect between men and women in particular seems like it's so extreme at the moment. I wish there was more of that wisdom for just the two sexes to try and come together a little bit and dialogue with one another because it feels like they're moving further away from one another. What's your sense?
Well, I try and talk to my husband about anything that's coming up all the time,
Mhm.
whether it's something that bothers me or something that excites me or help I need from him or whatever or vice versa, and it seems to work out well.
How long have you been with this current husband?
Well, we've been together since 2003, which was just a couple years after my uh, divorce, my original divorce. And then we got married in 2007, even though we lived together practically from 2003 on.
Okay.
So, over 20 years, basically, we've been together.
Yeah. And where did you 2 meet?
We met digitally.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. It
There
was
was go on.
It was something I'd never done before until my divorce. And then right after my divorce, I got back together with an old musician boyfriend that I'd had before my marriage, who I'd disconnected with in order to marry my first husband, who was also a musician and producer. And then after that divorce, I got back together with my other boyfriend, and then that really just didn't seem to me like it was going to go anywhere. So I thought, well, let's try something different here. So I went digital and started meeting guys and not really getting along with very many of them. And then I met Kurt, and it was super exciting. So right from the start, we were,
Wow.
from our first blind date, it was amazing.
There
And we
was this
still go to that restaurant that we went to on our blind date every year for our anniversary now. It's
oh, it's still there. That's amazing too in
the
LA.
same restaurant, and it's our favorite restaurant. It's a sushi restaurant called Nochi Sushi in LA, and,
Oh.
we love it.
There was a graphic going around the other day on Twitter or X or whatever you wanna call it now, and it was the how people used to meet graphic, and it is insane year by year from, like, the 1950s, it was friends, family, church, and then online is 0%, 0%, 0%, and then in the 90s, it goes up, and then it's 67% now, and everything else is like nothing.
Mm.
It is such a wild graphic to observe where you see how couples and people meet. It's just like exponential. It exponentially changed overnight. And I'm probably right around that time that you first decided to start trying. I think it was in the early aughts that you saw just like massive flip flop.
Yes,
It's wild. We lived
absolutely.
through such a wild, that's like such an insane cultural shift that I don't think people can quite get their minds around. How we've stopped meeting each other in real life and have are meeting virtually. That is, I don't think it's I don't know, it's something I contemplate all the time. It
And
it's it's really wild to me just to live through that is it's not just like going from albums to CDs, it's like
yeah,
also going from real life to virtual. It's insane to me.
true.
Um, what what were some of the things that you took from you've interviewed Bowie, you've interviewed, it seems like everybody.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you've taken from these, world class, mega famous creatives?
Well, one of my favorite interviews was the Ramones because I've always been a
Mm.
punk rock fan, and especially them, and finding out from them the origin of punk rock and how they felt that they'd started it basically, and what it meant and how important it was and all that kind of thing, and I just learned so much from them, and another great interview I had was Talking Heads, just shortly afterwards. That was an incredible interview, and not only that, those kind of bands, because I interviewed a lot of punk rock bands based in San Francisco, but also interviewing everybody from, let's see, like Mick Jagger and David Bowie and Grace Slick and Paul Kantner and geez, so many. And oh, another great interview I did was George Martin, the producer of the Beatles. That was incredible too, because I got to interview him because he had just come out with his memoir, his book, All You Need Is
Mm.
Ears, which was incredible. Talking to him about it after I read it and getting an amazing autograph from him and getting him to tell me how much he loved his interview with me and it was wonderful. It just, and plus I had already done the Beatles special and everything, and already interviewed Paul McCartney and George Harrison, and so he was thrilled to hear about that. And unfortunately, months later, because I interviewed him in January 1980, and many months later, when I was doing John Lennon's interview, I was thinking, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I could tell George Martin that I'm interviewing John Lennon? And, unfortunately, no. So
Yeah. What do you make of the industry now? Are you still doing interviews? What do you make of music and Rolling Stone and all the modern interview with musicians? What's your perspective on it?
I don't do rock musician interviews anymore. Basically, I don't work full time. My full time job is promoting my book
Mhm.
and getting that around and all the other things I have to do in my life. But the last big um, rock radio interview jobs I had was working for Dick Clark back in
Mm.
the 80s, which was amazing because not only did I write his weekly radio countdown show, but he asked me to ghostwrite his weekly nationally syndicated newspaper column. So
Oh,
I did
wow.
that, and I did interviews uh, with people for him with that with excuse me, I did interviews for his newspaper column with people that I was able to. Everybody from people in the police to people at the US Festival, and that was incredible. And that was an amazing thing. And then I started doing a lot of print interviews for rock magazine. Everybody from Grace Slick to Little Richard Penniman. And he was one of my favorite interviews, longest interviews of all time, almost as long, actually, probably maybe even just as long as the John and Yoko interview.
Mm.
That was great because it was after his book came out too, about his life. And so it was wonderful because he was one of the first musicians I'd ever listened to as a toddler, on my transistor.
Yeah.
So that was great. And then after that, I ended up moving to New York and doing a TV show, a music video countdown show, and doing some interviews there. And then as well, when I came back, I did BMG music video magazines. So I did interviews for everything from Metalhead to Country Music Video Magazine. Um, it was just incredible, and I got to deal with a lot of people. And then another cool thing was after that, I started doing my TV production. And one of the first projects I ever did was the music video with Lou Reed for a movie that he was being in. And so I got to hang out with him in the recording studio, and that was great.
Wow. Did you
All
ever interview Prince?
no, I didn't.
Mm.
Sorry to say
You
I
would
did.
Oh,
I
yeah. No, it's okay. Just curious.
and
Long
wish
list.
I interviewed Michael Jackson too, but I did.
Mm. Did you
But
interview Kurt Cobain, or was that too late? Were you already kind of out you were s you were still writing in the early '90s.
yeah, I'm trying to think. No, I didn't interview Kurt Cobain.
Yeah, there's so many of them that Are you tired of wading through media misinformation, trying to figure out a news outlet's spin or bias on any given story? Ground News is the solution you didn't know you needed. Ground News is the most complete news comparison app. It lets you make sense of the news on your own terms by letting you easily compare how a story is covered by different sources across the political spectrum and around the world. Compare any news article you want, filtering it by bias, left, right, or center, by location, so you can understand how news is being covered around the world, and by time, knowing when the story was first reported and how the reporting has changed. I'm obsessed with these guys. I love their blind spot report because you don't think you have blind spots, and then you see this report and you're like, oh, yeah, I had no idea that even happened. Start seeing the news more clearly, find out the truth, and stay up to date with what's going on in the world with the Ground News app. Use our affiliate link below to get 15% off. That's Ground News. Use the link below to get 15% off. Walk-ins Welcome is brought to you by Phetasy Productions. We are no longer on a network. We are completely independent. If you love this show and you love what we do, we are asking more now than ever before for you to join us in our community at Phetasy.com. Become a paid supporter and help support the podcast that you love. Being that we are independent means we're taking all of the expenses back, and that means that we need our listeners to support us. If you're also listening and you have a product and you want to advertise with us, please email me at phetasy@gmail.com. We're hoping that we leap and the net will appear. Please become a paid supporter at Phetasy.com and help us stitch our net together. Thank you. So, do you still keep up with that world at all, or do you listen to modern musicians? What are you listening to these days, or do you listen to mostly the classic rock?
I listen to some new musicians, fairly new, like the last 10 years or so.
Who are
Uh,
your favorites?
Alalas.
Mm.
Have you heard of them?
Yeah.
I like the Alalas. We just went to see them last week, as a matter
Oh,
of
fun.
Yeah, they were really good. And then an old friend of mine from my country music days, Lucinda Williams, Emmy winner, we just saw her as well too. And
Okay.
she's somebody great that I love listening to.
Okay. And so you're still going to live music, which so am I. I don't know if you ever get that. I don't know if you ever age out of that.
I hope not, because I still like to go see reggae music and blues and, whatever I can, so
Oh,
those
I was
are
so
fun.
sad when they tore down the House of Blues on Sunset. That was
Yeah.
such a great spot.
So were you living in Los Angeles then?
I was, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I'm younger than you, but I don't I you said I'm much younger, but I'm not sure that I'm 40. I'll be 46 in like a month. So I'm not I'm not I'm maybe older than you think I am.
No, I'm a couple decades older than you. Who
Yeah,
was your
but
favorite
still.
band to see at the House of Blues?
What?
Who was your favorite band to see at the House of Blues?
Oh, I mean, I loved Gospel Sundays there. I lived when I was there, I got when every chance I got to go see it. Who did I see? With the last one of the last shows I saw there was D'Angelo actually, and it was amazing. Amazing. And then I used to go, I was underage. I was not supposed to even be. And it was when I first moved to LA, I was like 20, and they had in that back room, in the behind in there was like the main stage, but then there was like this kind of back room that you could go into, and they used to have these like soul Sunday. They would have DJs there, and like the Roots guys would come in and they would DJ, and it was always just like such a party. And I went every Sunday that I could,
Sure.
and I was so upset. And then I do comedy, so was always at the Comedy Store across the street, and yeah, that was pretty heartbreaking when they took it down. I was like, "No, this is just like LA history."
I mentioned the Comedy Store in my book.
Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
Um yeah, you lived through such an interesting time, like and it really is it's It's I think there's so much nostalgia for this time because it is the kind of period, the last analog period before we start moving into digital. I've seen Radiohead many, many times, and it just turned fall here, and Radiohead is always my fall music, and I've seen them dozens of times. I love them.
Cool.
And he did an interview on KCRW when I was living in Los Angeles in 2000, and it was when Napster was, going through it was the great transition. And Tom York said all of these all these companies, all these studios, they basically wanted to make money making everybody convert their albums and cassettes to digital, and they saw all those dollar signs, and they never contemplated what genie they were letting out of the bottle by putting everything digital, that now you could, download it and get it for free. And um it would be much harder to gatekeep. And he was kind of like, too bad for them. Like he was actually on like Napster's side, which was interesting.
Yeah. Well, I still listen to a lot of music on the radio as well. It's very
Mm,
exciting for me. But like I said, I really love listening to albums,
yeah.
especially. So that's cool.
Yeah. Do you still keep up with the kind of your media, like your do you still keep up with the like rock interview genre? Do you follow any of that at all, or pick up a Rolling Stone occasionally and see what it's like?
Um, Very rarely, to be honest.
No, that's
Especially because since my book came out, what I really wanna do is read other people's memories and other people's rock-related books, so I spend a lot of my time doing that instead of reading
mm.
magazines. Although whenever I get my book reviewed in a magazine, of course, I read that all the time and post it and everything, so
How have the review Are you on social media?
yes, I am.
How have the reviews been?
Well, the reviews have been really good. Social media has been bad for me, unfortunately, because I had a spam hacker into my Meta social media accounts, which is Facebook and Instagram. So
Uh,
I lost them, and I had to start a new one like just a couple weeks ago. So I have much less friends, but I still post all about my book and the website that people can go to find out about my book and where they can buy it. Either in tons of stores all over the country and all over on websites all over the world, actually, and actually in stores all over the world too. I'm in stores in England as well, and other places, and so it's very exciting to me. And in case you'd like to know, my website is confessions of a rock and roll name dropper.com, and it's got not just all the book reviews in the past year or so, but my podcast appearances and links to TV show interviews and things that I did. And so it's that's a lot of work just to keep up with too, to do
Oh,
that
yeah.
website, you know. So
Oh, yeah, I mean, promoting a book is truly a full-time job. That's so many authors come on this podcast that is I probably read 2 books a week. It's actually insane, and I see their schedule and when their book drops and, they'll have the I don't know if you had a publicist did the publishing company have a publicist for you?
no,
So you're doing it all on your own, which is
yes.
even more insane because you're booking it and scheduling it and making the outreach, and that's a whole load of its own as well.
Well, fortunately, most people, not just friends of mine, but people who found out about my book, really liked it. And they came to my book signings and my New York fest for Beatles fan book signing and discussion appearances. Oh, and I have another book fest coming up. This is the 29 Palms Book Festivals coming up November 8th and 9th, and I'm taking part in that book signing and selling and a music book author discussion group and everything. And like I said, everybody has pretty much left me great reviews and liked my books. What did you think about my book?
I loved it. I mean, I also just am a huge fan of this genre. I'm interested to know what your favorite. I love the title. I think it's very grabbing. I think it's I some of the questions I have for you are like what makes somebody a great interview? When you say Little Richard was your favorite, one of your favorite interviews, my first question is, well, why does that stand out to you more than other people? What makes someone a great interviewer, but also what makes somebody a great interview?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah.
Um, well, Little Richard was an amazing interview because he was so honest about his life and the way that he went up to creating the music that he did and how he felt people felt about him. And plus, he had become a minister by that point.
Mm.
And he said, "Wow, are you by any chance planning to get married?" And I said, "Well, no, not now." And he said, "Oh, well, when you do, let me know and I will marry you. I will be your officiant." And I went, "Oh, wow, cool." So several years later, when I did get married, I contacted him, and unfortunately, he'd stopped doing it. So he didn't become our marriage officiant. But we got another incredible musician, Mojo Nixon, to do it for us, and he's the one who wrote one of my favorite songs of all time, "Elvis Is Everywhere," which I named
Mm.
after in my book after when I talk a lot about Elvis. And so he married us, and then unfortunately he died fairly recently after
Oh.
I wrote my book. But before that, he read my book and he came up with a cool comment about it that's on the back cover. And he was wonderful. And I love that song.
What what makes somebody what did you learn over your years of interviewing? If you were, teaching young people about interviewing, or what are some tips you have for how did you get these great interviews from these rock stars who are interviewed? There's a Radiohead documentary. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but you see how worn down they get from their tour and the interviewing schedule. So I think being somebody who can pull something different or get a different interview in your field is really remarkable because they're constantly being interviewed.
Well, I spent as much time as possible beforehand, not just coming up with questions, but thinking about how I could let them know the place that they took in my life the whole
Mm.
And for example, like Little Richard, letting him know that I'd been listening to him for so long. And it was so cool to be able to tell him that and see how excited he was. And to be able to tell David Bowie about seeing him on his Ziggy Stardust tour and hearing for the very first time what turned out to be my favorite David Bowie song, which is the Gene Genie,
Mhm.
and letting Mick Jagger know about getting tickets to sit in the front row, winning them to see his Nicaragua Rolling Stones benefit concert in LA. And so all those kind of things, getting rock star reactions to are amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. But what about people that you might not, have any connection to? What if it's just were there artists that you interviewed that you just, that it was an assignment, or were you always able to choose the interviews and the subjects that you were interested in personally?
Well, no, there were some assignments. For example, when I was writing the show, the Top 100 of the 70s, a lot of the artists for that I needed to interview,
Okay.
and it was not hard. I won't say it was hard, but it was just different because there was more that I had to consider, talking about how they'd come up with their incredible song and, that had gone so far in the 70s, that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
it all basically paid off. I'm an interview. It's just easy for me to ask people questions and talk to them about things that meant something to me or meant something to others.
Yeah. Do you think that that was something you were born with?
Um, Well, I definitely grew up asking questions of people because wanting to get away from my mother and stepfather, I had to ask people about, well, can I come stay with you? Can I do this? Can I work for you? Can I do? So
Yeah.
it's always something I've done.
That's really interesting how being in that kind of dysfunctional home forced you out of your, shell a bit to have to ask for help, which I don't think most people are very good at, but also just, you know, getting a sense of where people are at in their ability to help you. Just it's interesting.
It definitely turned me into who I am and what I'm able to do to this.
Yeah. Wow. And what are your favorite in your genre? Like you said, you spend a lot of time reading. Who are your favorites that you've read?
Well, Madeline Baccaro, who's a friend of mine, who wrote the Yoko Ono biography. That's an
Mm,
incredible book, and musician Lucinda Williams wrote her memoir, and that's interesting. I have to be honest and say it's not as clearly written as I would want it to be, but it's still fascinating. And then another favorite author is Kenneth Womack, who writes a lot of Beatles related books and originally interviewed me for his book about the last years of John Lennon. And that's how I
mm.
met up with him and let him know that I was eventually going to write my book. And he's like said, well, when you do, let me know. And I did, and I sent it to him, and he was really positive about it. And he offered to help me find a publisher, which
Oh.
didn't end up happening, but I did on my own. But he ended up writing the incredibly complimentary forward to my book
Mhm.
in it,
It was a
and
great forward.
yes, and we got to appear together at the New York Fest for Beatles fans this past February, and
Oh.
hopefully will again, and the next one this March. So yeah, so it's very exciting.
So wild how that moment was that's what really strikes me about your book, and it is, like you say, the best and worst day of your life where it's this as you recall and talk about in your book, it's this like career highlight moment, and then it becomes a day in history forever of tragedy and horror and grief and loss and obviously all the other things. And you were one of the last people that spoke to this man. It's just it is like it's one of those things where you always think about like, oh, John Lennon and then Yoko and the child and the people in the inner circle whose lives are affected, but you were a rock and roll reporter whose life was completely changed by this. Did you have to did in the aftermath, did you just kind of go silent? What was the immediate aftermath like for you?
Well, I already had a number of interviews booked right afterwards
Mm.
that unfortunately I couldn't cancel, even though I didn't really necessarily want to. And the first one was with Neil Diamond. And it
Mm.
actually was a good interview, but still it made me sad. And then Barry Manilow was an incredible interview, like just a couple days after that too, because John Lennon had been talking about Barry Manilow as well. So that was pretty fascinating. And Barry Manilow sent a letter afterwards to RKO and to me saying it was the best radio special that he'd ever done, and
Oh.
my writing of it, and so that was really cool. And then I continued doing a number of other things and going to work for companies and being on the air, and then, like I said, going to work for Dick Clark and
Yep.
starting all that, and even though I eventually, because of all the guilt I felt, stopped mentioning right off the bat that I'd, you know, co-conducted John Lennon's last interview, everybody who knew mentioned it to everybody else, and that's
Right.
like I said, they kept asking me, "When are you going to write your book?"
Yeah.
You
Yep.
know, like I said, I got to say in my introductory chapter,
Yep.
"Now."
Yep. Yeah, I'm glad that you were able to pull it out of yourself. I don't know that, I think whenever you write about these highly charged emotional things, you have to relive it in a way to even go to that place, and it's not easy to recall, and to a lot of people never write their stories for that reason. I loved it's not in this genre, but have you ever read Open? It's Agassiz biography or he
No.
co-wrote it with somebody. It is a absolutely riveting. I mean, I couldn't put it down, and it was like this, like, tennis player's autobiography, memoir, basically, and it was tr I think I read it in 3 days. It was I always mention it as truly one of the best memoirs I've ever read because it was just such a page. It's not normal that, yours too, it's like, "And then what? And then what? And then what?" And your story is very I appreciate that you, in your memoir, talk about where you came from, everything that led to this moment, because you didn't come from it's not like you made yourself. You're truly self-made. You're a person who overcame a lot of hardship and circumstances that weren't necessarily ideal, and still created this amazing career and life for yourself. And that should be inspiring to anybody out there. And then to live through this crazy historical moment and also still come out, you seem relatively, I mean, from what I can tell, you seem like you're relatively well adjusted and happy and still going to live music. I think a lot of people might have gone crazy after that.
Well, I like to think that I made it okay and that
Yeah.
everything's been okay since, and I also like to think that everybody will be listening and to your, uh, compliments on my book and read it and, hopefully love it as well.
They should definitely buy it and read it, and I also think they should, just because I believe very firmly in supporting the work of creatives and creative people like yourself who put themselves out there and have a history and are a part of history. And I I do think that there is that spirit now out there, of like supporting artists, and I hope we keep it going. And um what advice do you have as someone who has lived this creative path? What advice do you have for creatives?
Stay creative. Don't
Mm,
stop as much as possible.
I love that. Do you have a next project?
Well, my current project, as I mentioned, is the promotion of my book, and that's
Mhm.
creative as well. So, I can't really come up with another book right now. Don't know if I will, but you never know, or you never know if I'll come up with articles. But right now, like I said, it's the promotion that takes my time, and the creation of posts for YouTube and social media and all that stuff, and
Your
my website.
story Oh, sorry. Your story reminds me of, what was that movie? The one about the rock journalist, and he was like, very young. Oh, is it Cameron Crowe? What's his name? It's the one that movie, the Almost Famous.
Oh,
It's a little bit like that. It's a little like this young woman who's just like out there interviewing all these rock stars, and then you end up in this situation, and you're the last person who interviews John Lennon. It's just wild. It is really wild.
yeah,
And it
interesting.
is like one of those things where you're like, I don't want to mention it, but it is like a very strange thing to have happen. It is very strange. And kudos to you for being able to be so open and honest about all of it.
Thank you.
What's your biggest defective character?
As far as what?
However you interpret that, it can be a vice that you're trying to get rid of. It can be something that gets in your way. A lot of people say, procrastination, laziness. Like for me, I think it's like spite, or I mean, there's a long list, but however you interpret it, it's the same two questions I ask everybody at the end of my podcast.
Well, I try to keep up on the plans that I make and appointments that I make, everything from medical to working out to um, appointments with people that want to know things about me, that sort of thing. So it's just hard to sometimes because I
Yeah.
put so much on the calendar.
Mm, overscheduled.
I
What's
try not to.
Yeah. What's
But
your
that's
biggest what?
I was gonna say that's one reason why I've gotta get going, unfortunately.
Okay. What's your biggest asset? That's the last question.
Uh, well, I love being married to my husband. He's really
Mm,
wonderful, and, I love my house here in LA and also my other property, which is in Joshua Tree, the
I
high
love
desert.
Joshua Tree.
It's incredible, and we go there, fairly often, and, I also have a, short-term vacation rental, cabin there as well for
Oh,
people.
do you?
Yes, and it's very exciting to hear what they think about it, and there's a website for that too,
I
ranchorockatio.com.
might rent it.
Oh, well, let me know.
Joshua Tree is my church. I
Yeah.
went there constantly. It is my church.
Well, then you'll love my property the most because it's right near the national park,
Oh, okay.
right up at the base of the boulders, and it's got, private, hiking trails and everything down through, land that's just like in the park, except that there's no, horrible amount of tourists like there are in the park, and
What is it called again?
Rancho Rockatio,
Rock how do you spell that?
Ranchorockotilo.
Oh, okay, gotcha. After the plant there.
So if you go to ranchorockatio.com, you can see pictures and
Ooh,
on it and everything,
I'm
and
gonna rent it.
just let me know, and you can rent it directly from me.
I will. Well, where can we find you on social media? And you've mentioned where to find your book, but you can, plug it again.
Well, you can find me as Laurie Kaye on Facebook. And also have a temporary site right now, Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper, on Facebook. I don't know how long that's going to last still because of the hacker thing. Um, but my book, once again, Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper.com, my life leading up to John Lennon's last interview. And I still get very touched when I say the title and also show my book cover, which I'm wearing on my t shirt.
I
And
love it.
if anybody's interested in a t shirt, they can let me know.
Okay.
And um, that sort of thing. And it's wonderful. And I can't wait for more and more people to read it and hopefully totally dig it and leave me a complimentary 5-star online review, either Amazon or Goodreads or Barnes and Noble, etc., wherever they can, because that will help promote my book and that will help me. So thank you very much in advance.
No, thank you for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
The check-in with Bridget and cousin Maggie can now be found at Phetasy.com. It's been titled Another Round with Bridget Phetasy, and it's now in video.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.